Hi there my friends, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all keeping well. Today's project is going to be a mute swan in watercolours, and I'm using a sheet of Bockingford cold press watercolour paper, 14 inches by 10 inches at 140 pounds in weight, and I've sketched on a very rough outline of a mute swan with Faber-Castell erasable coloured pencil in light blue. I believe those pencils come in a range of 24 different colours, and I'll link everything that I'm using today in the description below. So having taped down a sheet of paper, it was actually on a block of paper, but I took the top sheet off and taped it down to a board. I'm now applying just clean water to the area where I want to start applying pigment. The reason I chose to use Core watercolours, and that's QOR watercolours, is because they are fast moving when adding to a wetted surface, and also if you add one pigment on top of another and the lower pigment is still wet, they will move quite fast. So if that's something that you really enjoy seeing in your work, where you let watercolour do its thing and move about a lot, then I can thoroughly recommend the Core watercolours. They come in tubes. I'm not sure if they come in pans. They're a little bit pricey, but a lot of pigment goes a long way. So I've wetted this area, and now I'm just applying a little bit of pigment. Now when I put the water on with the clean brush, I did take the water right the way up to the edge of the drawing, but I'm only putting enough pigment on to travel not quite as far as the edges, because I want the edges to remain white, so that the swan will look like it's white edged and lit from the back, and you'll see that as we travel through the painting. So just adding a little bit of pigment at a time and mixing these two colours on the page and sometimes on the palette. And just so I could get everything into the camera view, I'm just using a porcelain tray. So it's like a porcelain dish. Makes for a really good mixing surface, as long as you've not got too many pigments on the go, because you don't want them all blending into each other on the dish or plate. So if I'm not using this, normally in the studio I'd be using a partitioned porcelain palette, a round one that has many little wells in it. But that's quite hard to fit onto screen for videoing for YouTube. Okay, so it's going a little bit darker, letting the pigments do its thing. And if you're not happy with the results, you can put another wash of water over the top once this layer has dried, and go in again if you want to darken any areas. At this point I'm happy with how things are going. I'm working from a reference image just of a normal mute swan, so really just making this up as I go along regarding colour. So that's dry, that area is now dried, and I did dry it off with a hairdryer just to speed up the drying process. If you're using salt techniques or anything like that, then you need to leave time for the paint to dry naturally. But as I wasn't using salt or anything like that in this painting, I was okay just to go ahead and speed things along. You can use a hairdryer or a heating tool, anything like that, just to dry the paper. And also it makes the paper dry back to flat, because this did buckle quite a bit, but it dried back completely flat in the end. So skipping a few places here and there, letting some of the white of the paper show through. And throughout the painting, I just wanted the overall feel to be a cool violet feeling, hence using a limited palette. So just phthalo blue, dioxazine violet, I believe, Payne's grey, and a couple of orange colours later on in the process. So quite a limited palette. So again, just applying water everywhere, and then just dropping the pigment in and letting it do its thing. And it's a really relaxing technique. and you can go darker, and obviously if you go too dark in one area, you can lift pigment out with a damp brush, although the brush needs to be drier than the paper, else the paper will just absorb any water out of the brush, or with a tissue. And that is something I wished I'd done at an earlier stage when I start applying the background, but you'll see that as we go along. Every painting is a learning curve, no matter how long you've been painting. As a creative, you're always learning, and every painting is unique, and you will learn new things along the way. So just following a feel for feathers. I don't want to be outlining any feathers or anything like that. We just want to get a feathery feel about the back of the swan. So the only thing really that ends up being detailed is the swan's face, its eye and beak and things like that. The rest is just atmospheric, I guess. So going on to a drier area there, because as the paper dries, you are going to get different effects. The drier the paper, the less movement of the watercolour. So the watercolour won't be able to move unless there's water on the surface already. So if you want a soft area with soft edges, then make sure you've got water going beyond the area where the pigment's going to be added. If you want any hard edges, only put the water up to where you want the pigment to stop moving, and then you'll get a hard edge. Or by painting just directly onto dry paper, you'll also get a hard edge. So just going down a little bit darker where the swan's sitting, meeting the surface of the water. And the brush I'm using is by Zen Art, and you can buy a pack of those off Amazon, and they're really, really good watercolour brushes. Hold lots of water, lots of pigment, do a great job. And I've had these now for a couple of years and they've never let me down. So just lifting up a little bit of water and pigment there and shifting everything around so we can get it back in frame, and mixing again. So now we're going on to wetted area again. So what I've done, once everything was dried, I went over the head and neck with another wash of clear water, and now I'm adding a second layer because I do feel I need to darken things up a tiny bit, especially down the mid-range of the head and neck, but less so along the edges because we want them to feel as though the light is shining in from the back. So I keep looking at my reference image that's on my iPad just in front of me, and it's just given me a few ideas as I'm working. Obviously the swan in my reference image doesn't look like this at all. It's just a normal looking swan, normal lighting, etc. And just playtime, just having a feel for the products as we go. Even though I've used these paints many times before, it's always nice just to swap and change. I like to swap and change between mediums, so hence sometimes I fancy like doing a pastel painting or a watercolour painting, or acrylics or oils, things like that. And every time I step back into a previous medium, it's a little bit of getting to know your products in the first few minutes, and then off you go. As the paper dries, you'll notice that the lines become harder when popping more pigment on, but you can soften it down with a damp brush if they look too harsh. Again, lifting can be done, but the two colours I'm working with are pretty much staining colours, which means even if you do lift them out while they're still wet with a tissue or a damp brush, or dry brush even, the paper underneath will have been stained somewhat by the pigment, so you won't get back to the natural white of the paper. If there's areas in the subject that I wanted to remain really pure white, then I could have masked them out with masking film or masking fluid and removed that after the painting process. But there wasn't in this case, so I just went ahead and filled in the swan, as you can see here. So just keep darkening areas as I see them, and when you're working through a painting, don't do one part, or I don't actually do one part and then feel as though that part is complete. As I'm creating a project, I'll go backwards and forwards to different parts and balancing the painting as a whole as I work through it. So looking to see if anywhere needs to go darker, if anywhere needs to remain really light, and just getting a feel for the subject as I work through the painting. You can achieve this somewhat by doing thumbnail sketches and colour studies and things like that, but personally I don't have time and I just like to jump straight into a project. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong, and I either correct it, or you can always start again, especially with something this small. The complete painting took about an hour and a half, so I've condensed things down to around about 38 minutes. So a nice, quick and easy project for you to do, or for, you could do, I'm trying to think of some white subjects that you could do instead of a swan. You could do a goose, a duck, maybe a chicken, a dove, a stoat in winter, coat, snowshoe hare. You could even do a deer and do it white, or choose any animal or bird and just decide to do them just in a couple of colours and see how it goes. You could just do a normal rabbit or a mouse, even anything really, and just have a play. Or if you like doing still life, you could do apples or bananas and things like that, or flowers even, but just use a limited palette. It doesn't have to be these two colours. It could be yellow and orange, or green and blue. It could be anything, and it's really nice just to have a play with a limited palette once in a while. I wouldn't want to be doing this all the time, but for things like this where you want things to look like they should be white, or we perceive something as being white, like a polar bear, it's just nice to have a play with different colours to portray a white image. To help you along the way, if you do have a reference image of something and you're considering working with just a couple of colours to make a sort of a tonal map, then try changing your photo settings to just black and white, and that will take away the colour for you, and it will show you where the darkest areas are, where the lightest areas are, and where the mid-tones are, and that will help too, just to lessen the confusion of having all the different colours in front of you when you're not actually working with those colours. So introducing a little bit of the blue now. So in a normal painting, warm colours look as though they're nearer to the viewer, and cooler colours look as though they're further away from the viewer. Now in this painting, this particular painting, I don't have that to help me, so it's more about contrast in this painting, darks and lights and things like that. And if I go darker underneath this wing, then it's going to look like it's nearer to the viewer than the feathers that are on top of the back of the bird. Because they're softer and more muted in colour and tone, they're going to look slightly further away. So there's always a way round of planning out a painting, even when using a limited palette such as this. So I just keep switching between adding a little bit of pigment or adding a little bit of water, so the pigment is a little bit freer to move. And as you can see from the palette on the right hand side, I'm using very little paint. It's hardly any being used at all. The paint that isn't used, the blobs of paint, I can lift and put into little square pans for use later, or if they've not been contaminated by any other colour and haven't had any water put on them, then I can scoop them up and put them back into the actual tubes. but in this instance I'm just going to pan them. And you can buy the little white plastic pans off places like Amazon. You get a bag of 50 for just £2 or £3. They're really cheap, and that way if you just pop the pigment into a pan, leave it to dry, don't cover it or anything like that, just let it dry in the pan, and then you can put it in your favourite palette to work from later. So just keeping the layers nice and thin, and it's really nice to work from light to dark so as not to over swamp the image with too many darks, and then you'll lose that atmospheric feel, sort of a dreamy feel. Well, that's how it seems to me. Again, I'm thinking about shadow and shape, and putting the darkest colours on where I believe the bottom shadowed areas of the feathers would be. So anything further up towards the light source would be lighter, and where the feathers are dropping into the depth of other feathers, then going a little bit darker. So no need to outline feathers and things like that for this small subject. And when you're applying a little bit of pigment to a wetted area, you can control the direction of the pigment flow somewhat. You can drag it back on itself so it doesn't get too carried away and go to the edges, creating just one solid colour. And if you time it right, you can add pigment just as the paper is drying, so it will spread a little bit but not too much, because you don't want the colour to simply flood everywhere that you've applied water or a lighter wash of colour. I mean, there are instances where you do want a flat wash, and that's when you do let watercolour just do its thing and travel everywhere. But in things like this, I'm conscious that I want to keep some areas feeling very light in colour and tone. And it's really hard to forget that there's actually a white edge running around the swan at the moment. I'm leaning into my screen and I can see the pencil line running around the top part of the swan's head and neck, and the paint hasn't moved that far, so I do know and can see areas that are going to remain white throughout the entirety of the painting. And as you'll see later on, areas that do get slightly contaminated with pigment and are unable to lift, you can then go in later on when everything's dry as the final stage and just pop around the edges with some white gouache. And if you're looking for a white gouache, so gouache is just an opaque watercolour, but a white gouache that works really well with watercolours, as I'm doing here, is the P.H. Martin's bleed proof ink. Now it says ink and it's white, but it's actually just very, very thin gouache, and you can run it through an airbrush, you can use it with a pen, all different things, but it's very, very runny and it doesn't let any colours show through it. So it's called bleed proof, not because it doesn't bleed into anything else, because obviously it's got water as part of its component, so if you pop a little drop of it onto a wet area it will travel. Bleed proof means other colours don't show up through it once it's dry, so you can add highlights to eyes and things like that. So just going on to drier paper now. I haven't dried this off with a hairdryer yet. As you can see, the strokes I'm adding just there, they're fuzzying out at the edges a little bit, which shows the paper in that area is still damp. As I move upwards here and yeah, around that area, the paper's a little bit drier, and so the edges of where I've applied the pigment are a little bit sharper. And again, going back for a third run, or might even be a fourth run under this area, just to intensify the pigment and making it look darker, so it looks closer to the viewer. This project is actually going to be my workshop in November. If anybody's interested, I think there are a couple of places left on it as far as I'm aware, and that's at the WWT, so that's the Wetland and Wildfowl Trust at in Lancashire, Martin Mere in Lancashire, and I run one workshop every other month, and we alternate between pastels one month, and then for the next workshop it's watercolours, and this is going to be the subject I'm going to be working through with participants on that one in November. That's November 2025. I'll link a link below. So I'm happy with the swan so far, but now I want to get it grounded. So really simple, again working with a Zen watercolour brush, a flat, applying clean water and then splashing some pigment on. And I have mixed up quite a bit of pigment to the right hand side because I didn't want to run out once working on a larger area. So keep that in mind too. If you're working on a really small area, you only need to mix a little bit of pigment, but if you're working on a larger area, then make sure you mix more than you think you're going to need. So I've already applied one layer to the background, I've dried it, and now I'm adding layer number 2. And really you can add as many layers as you want, as long as you let each layer dry, or dry it with a hairdryer. So I have gone over part of the beak tip, but that's fine because I lift a little bit of that out with clean water later on once the background's dry, and then add the colour to the beak as I go. So wetting an area, applying some pigment, keeping the strokes horizontal as best I can, so that if any lines show up in the background, they'll be horizontal to the painting and they'll look natural and not out of place. So it's not as easy as doing a controlled wash. Well, I guess this is sort of a controlled wash, but a flat wash where you go from one side to the other, drop down a little bit and back on yourself, and then one side to the other. So you're going left to right, drop down, right to left, drop down, left to right, things like that, where you can control a whole sweeping wash. Not that simple when you're having to avoid intricate shapes, and definitely don't want to get it over the white areas of the swan. So take your time, apply your water to more area than you think you're going to need, and that way you'll end up with no hard lines running through your background. So just lifting up a little bit of pigment and applying it to the wet paper, and then working it into the wet background. Now, it was sort of looking back on this painting during this process, I wish I'd have added a little something to the background. I end up going quite dark in the background, which is nice because it shows the swan's outline very well then. But in hindsight, I wish I'd have added a little bit of texture, maybe some water droplet texture, maybe a push a little bit of salt texture, although I didn't want anything to take away the focus from the swan. But if I was to do it again, I would probably do a little something or other with the background. and you could with yours. So have a play. But really just this painting was getting in preparation for the up and coming workshop next month. Something that I always try and choose a subject and techniques that are suitable for complete beginners, and then if there are more advanced students on the course for the day, then they can add their flourishes and flares to their own projects on the day. But everybody will be hopefully pleased with the workshop and going away with a painting that they really like. Okay, so proof that you don't need much paint. All I did with these two oranges was open the tube of paint and literally press the open tube of paint onto the paper. I didn't squeeze the tube or anything like that. Put the caps back on and put them away. That was enough to deposit a little bit of pigment onto this piece of paper. I could then pull pigment from with a damp brush. So you don't need to waste any pigment. These two little blobs of paint on this piece of paper will stay active for as long as I want them to. I just put this page away with my watercolours and can reactivate these two tiny little blobs of paint whenever I want to. Obviously the areas on the paper that have dried into the paper probably won't be very reactive in the future, but the little blobs will be. So just putting a little bit of shadowing underneath there on the beak. And as you see, I was able to lift the lilac-y colour that had gone over the end of the beak with a damp, clean brush. Lifted it off with a tissue. And so I could pop the orange over the top. And I'm just dipping into a tiny, tiny bit of Payne's Grey as well. That's just off to the left. Also on the paper. Just a tiny, tiny blob. Adding a little bit of Payne's Grey and mixing it with the oranges and things works really well. Especially as a shadow colour. But I didn't add any to the swan itself, the feather portion of the swan, just to the beak and the eye. And this is all working wet on dry. So again, just using the Zen Art brushes. Wonderful, wonderful company. The brushes are beautiful and they keep the tips really well. And look after your brushes and your materials, and they will look after you in the long run. So now you can tell it's a mute swan. A lovely part extending up from the beak. And this is just pure Payne's Grey that I'm applying now. And if you don't know what Payne's Grey is, it's just a bluish, it's almost a bluish black. There's quite a bit of blue in it. If you thin it right down, it is quite blue. Some artists don't like it, but I actually love Payne's Grey. If you're unsure about adding a new colour to a project, maybe a project you've already started, then just try playing with a few colours on a scrap piece of paper. And then if they look well together on that, then you'd be good to go adding them to your project. Be careful if you're adding Payne's Grey to a painting where you've painted with yellow, because obviously the blue in Payne's Grey, if it mixes with yellow, you will end up with green. And also, and that goes for black as well. Be careful if you're using black in a painting where you've applied or intend to apply yellow, because black and yellow, yeah, you've guessed it, they create green. I've not found a black that doesn't contain some sort of blue that when mixed with yellow creates green. And a normal black, Mars black and things like that, or transparent black in acrylics, if they mix with yellow, the green that you end up having on your painting isn't a very nice green, and the same applies with most blacks that I've tried, in watercolours too. So just using the 2 oranges backwards and forwards and a little bit of the Payne's grey now. And I do have a tissue in my other hand just in case I pop a bit of pigment in and it splashes, or it goes in the wrong place, or it goes on too heavy. Then I can quickly swoop in with my other hand with the tissue and dab it out. Obviously the area around all of this is completely dry, so just going in with a clean damp brush and just lifting out some of the pigment then. And then feeling like I need to add more, so you can go backwards and forwards. Also, if you're finding you're lifting pigment instead of putting pigment down, try drying an area first before adding more pigment. So you could dry the initial layer down with a hairdryer or heating tool, and then apply water over the top to apply your second layer of pigment. Or you might just want to go on to dry paper for your second layer, especially if you're putting detailing on. If you want to paint detail, then 9 times out of 10 you need your initial layers to be completely dry, so that your detail doesn't look fuzzy. And here we go with the Dr. P.H. Martin's Pen White Bleed Proof ink, and I've put in brackets gouache because that's what it is. No matter what gouache you get, it's going to do the same thing. Just water it down to a nice milk-like consistency and then apply it and let it dry. But unless it's acrylic gouache, which is completely different, this gouache, if I put it somewhere that I don't want it, I can, even if it's dried, I can get a damp brush and lift it. If you use acrylic gouache, then it has the acrylic tendency within its properties, and it will dry permanently and you won't be able to lift it. So that's the two. Normal gouache is reactive with water even when it's dry and will lift. Acrylic gouache, when dry, won't react with water, so you can't lift it, but you can tint it. So just going around the edges now, not going over all of the white that I've left, because that's why I've left all the white of the paper showing. I'm just literally going around the edges and just tidying things up, adding a little bit of feather detail, you know, sticky out bits where the feathers might be fluffed up a little bit, and just finishing off the edges like that. So just tidying up. And keeping it in frame. And thankfully my hair didn't get in the way this time. Okay, so I'm happy with the swan as it is. Going back down onto the water surface now. So as you can see, because I was using horizontal strokes with my brush on the previous wash of this part of the background, well, foreground, the lines that have been left just look like ripples, and that is a good thing because that's saving you from having to go backwards and forwards and put in ripples in. Now the bit I've left there, I was going to put a reflection of the beacon, but then I decided it would be too distracting, so I'm taking that out. So go backwards and forwards, wetting an area, adding pigment. But obviously I want to leave some of this foreground lighter than other areas, because I want to get a feel as though there is a reflection of the swan there without having to paint a reflection in. I hope that makes sense. So again, going darker towards where the body of the swan is meeting the water. It grounds the swan, it makes it feel like it's actually sitting in the water, and again, because it's darker, it's drawing that part of the painting towards the viewer. Obviously the background needs to be quite dark because of the outline of the swan being white. Contrast is a huge thing in a painting. It will make something look more realistic than colour alone will. And just the final bits going in now. I'm lifting some of the pigment with a clean damp brush, just to imply ripples, but nothing that's going to take the viewer's eye away from the swan. This painting is all about the swan and painting a white subject with watercolour. So just seeing where the light might be hitting the water and creating a tiny reflection of light there. And keeping the strokes again horizontal. As you can see, I'll never get back to the white of the paper, but that's fine, because if you do want white ripples on your painting or white areas, now you know you can use gouache to do that. So you can use a scrubber brush. There are watercolour scrubber brushes that will take the surface of the paper away, sometimes taking you back to the white of the paper. But make sure if you do that, you definitely don't want to go back over that area with any more colour, because once the scrubber brush has gone in and removed the surface of your paper, then it will react differently with watercolours thereafter. And there you have it. White swan, a mute swan in core watercolours on a sheet of Bockingford paper. Hope everyone's keeping well. Thank you for watching this video today. Thanks for the likes and subscribes, and I will see you all soon. Take care for now. Bye bye.